We are privileged tonight to have Star Parker as our keynote. She has distinguished herself as a columnist, a politician, author, and activist. I looked her up on Wikipedia, I'm not going to lie, and I found out that some of your formative years were in Japan. Now I need you to know that most of her time was in East St. Louis, which means that she is tough. Anybody know about East St. Louis, right? The fact that she got out and no gang affiliations means she's tough. Went to Woodbury University, Burbank area of California. One of my favorite things about her is what she started in 1995 in beginning CURE, Center for Urban Renewal and Education. Through this potent agency, she has brought awareness, activity, and discussion on two huge aspects, other entities as well, but especially regarding race and poverty. She's on the front lines. Although losing a congressional seat in the 37th district a few years back, ironically, much was gained as a result of that election. I love that, when losses can become great wins. She has written a few books, and as a pastor, I'm not really sure if I can read this one title, but I'm going to do it anyway. Just don't tell my church I did. One is called Pimps, Horse, and Welfare Brats. From welfare cheat to conservative messenger. That's just a good title, folks. Another one, Uncle Sam's Plantation, how big government enslaves America's poor and what we can do about it. Finally, White Ghetto, how middle class America reflects the inner city decay. I have a tremendous respect for Ms. Parker's beliefs and her urgent calling and definitive action. It's one thing to have a calling, it's one thing to have a particular belief set, but when you're out there affecting change, it's a whole other game entirely. So tonight, it has been a privilege for me to meet in person Ms. Star Parker, but it is a privilege greater still for all of us to hear what she has to say. Would you please give her a warm welcome tonight, Star Parker.
Thank you. Thank you, Pastor. Thank you. It's wonderful to be up here in Connecticut. I just so appreciate being the keynote speaker for tonight. I get an opportunity in my work to get out and just meet decent people in quiet communities just doing the most amazing work for the Lord. You know, I get asked often, where do I actually live? They say, where do you live? And I say, well, I don't know if I live in Marriott Hotels or Delta Airlines because I work in Washington, D.C., but I physically live in Southern California. And a lot of people think that's a long commute. Most people say it's a long commute, but if those are the ones I know have never been on the freeways in Southern California. But I'm telling you that to say that when I cross the country all the time to go to Washington, D.C., folks ask me about that journey, what's going on in Washington, and how desperate things are becoming because of Washington and the overreach of government. And then they'll make little jokes about California and being the left coast. So I guess you kind of hear them out here being also in the Northeast. They always have something strange to say. I tell you, coming in though, we always thought we had the corner on beauty when it comes to land, but looking out from 35,000 feet today coming in, it was just like amazing. I'm not going to tell anyone in California because they'll really get depressed. But I hear all of the jokes about how, you know, we're the left coast and we're like Sodom and Washington's like Gomorrah, and why in the world would I want to do that? And I said, well, you know, if we're Sodom and they're Gomorrah, at least in Sodom, we're using our own money. I have a real problem with the thieves and liars in Washington. And so it gives me opportunity when I come out in the places like yours, even though you're battling on the front line on some very, very heavy issues, it's just good to know that there are people that are willing to fight for their local communities. My testimony was mentioned a little bit, and I think there's some even in your bulletin. A lot of folks come out that know me. I'm surprised so many know me in Connecticut because I don't know that any of the papers pick me up, but some will come up and You know, they see me in a little box from my column. It's been syndicated for over 10 years, and they'll say they want to see me in person, and they'll try to tell me how much prettier I am in person, and I just tell them, oh, thank you. And, you know, some are just plain old Foxaholics, and they'll come up to me because they've seen me on Fox, and then they'll say, I'm prettier in person, and I know I don't believe that one because Fox puts a lot of makeup on us. And in fact, if you go to New York, they spray you with makeup. And so, especially when I'm doing the Varney show, I was telling someone the other day, anytime I do Varney, which I just did last week, you know, he's the morning show. So when I get sprayed with makeup like that, I have to go immediately and get it off because I wouldn't want people to think I reverted to my old life and I was just getting in from the night before. So, you know, but I'd say thank you anyway, you know, that those are good compliments that you would come out to events like this, or even some of my Cure supporters. In fact, one of my most beautiful supporters is here because when we found out that she lived not far from this event, I told her, you know, you ought to come over. I called her up, and Phyllis came. I'm not going to embarrass her, but I was able to come and be introduced to your work, the local work that's here. And it's just critical because our society is collapsing. The work I do at Cure, I think, is important on a national level, but what you're doing is as important. You know, for those of you that don't know me, I've been in public life for about 25 years, and many people know my story. They know that in my young life, I lived on welfare. And after a Christian conversion, I just totally changed my life. And, you know, the book that was just mentioned, Pimps, Whores, and Welfare Brats, that's actually my autobiography, just to tell you how deeply I believe the lie of the left. I believe the lie of the left so deeply that the poor were poor because the wealthy are wealthy, or that my problems were somebody else's fault, or that America was so inherently racist that I didn't need to mainstream, that I got really lost, including in East St. Louis. And if the only reason that I wasn't conquered by the gangs is because I was in the gang, and I was doing a conquering. In fact, in my autobiography, Pimps, Whores, and Welfare Brats, I've often said I left a lot of details out because I wasn't sure about statutes of limitations, and I didn't want to end up in jail after all I've been through. But after a Christian conversion, I just totally changed. I just totally changed my life. And I went back to college, I got a degree, and I started a business. And after the '92 Los Angeles riots destroyed my business, I began to work in public policy. And I worked on welfare reform in the '90s because I knew firsthand the damage that had been done by the lies of the left when it came to making political promises that somebody else would take care of you if we stole their money out of one and gave it to another. I know through my Christianity that redistribution of wealth was just inconsistent with not only the founding of this country being founded in freedom and personal responsibility, but inconsistent with the scripture. The 10th commandment says don't covet, and socialism is rooted in covetousness. Somebody has something somebody else doesn't have, so we go hire politicians to take it from them. That's theft. Now you've got us violating 2 commandments in the same action. So I began, after welfare reform, my organization today, Cure, the Center for Urban Renewal and Education, where we promote market-based solutions to fight poverty. And I ended up in Washington, D.C. just because I wanted to remove governmental barriers, the barriers that had entrapped my life and the lie of the left. Don't work, don't save, don't get married, and we'll just kind of keep you enslaved to this poverty plantation. And so I ended up then having to get to Washington, D.C., and I concluded after getting there that we needed change, serious change. I knew that we needed people that believed in traditional values, because choice absolutely loses its meaning if it doesn't matter what you choose. And that's one of the things that is so significant about the Family Institute. They're saying, wait, there are values. We can't just allow for the society collapse because somebody wants to indulge in their impulses. You know, limited government. We need people that believe in limited government. The role of government is to protect our interests, not to plunder them, not to pursue them, and free markets. I went to Washington, D.C. because when you look at the economic collapse, it's because we have crippled the free markets. Profit is good, and in fact, it's the engine for tomorrow so that we can get the jobs that we all say that we want. And I also went to Washington because I believed in strong national allegiance. You know, my life story embodies American exceptionalism. And when these folks, the hard left, the progressives came into Washington a few years ago to promote their agenda, we started pushing back. You've been pushing back, but others started pushing back to say, no, American exceptionalism is real. And my life story is the embodiment that anyone from any background, from any ethnicity, even those that just need to be born again, can begin over in this great country of ours, and that we are going to make sure that we protect those interests, the interest of traditional values, limited government, free markets, and a strong national allegiance and defense. But yet today, all of these founding principles are under aggressive attack. The progressives keep telling us that Republicans just lose national elections because of their conservative brand. So now you have even the political party pushing against God's traditional people because of that environment, that desire for power. They're under this impression that the conservative brand is what's wrong with our country today. You know it from your state, those progressives that continue to think that they will be okay if we would just be quiet. They will be okay if the church would just be silent. They keep telling us that conservatives, if we would just act like liberals, then maybe, just maybe, young people and old people and women people and black people and short people and maybe even a few illegal people might start liking you. You know, they want to say that if us conservatives would just get with the program. They want us in their program, rap a little, smoke pot a little, take off your clothes in front of total strangers a little, give up your guns, give up your God, and of course you have to give up your disapproval of the gays, and then only put really liberals in political office, even if they have R's behind their names, whether it's state or national, then maybe, just maybe, the national comedians will stop mocking you and just ignore you instead. I'm telling you that lies didn't start yesterday. The lies that you're working up against didn't start, won't end tomorrow. What's going to take is a resilient people. You mentioned Samuel Adams. One of the best quotes that he ever penned was that it doesn't take a majority to prevail, but just an irate, tireless minority that's keen on setting brush fires of freedom in the minds of men. And when you think about what we're doing here, this great work in this great state, and states all across this country, we can begin to turn things around for our country because things do need to be turned around. You know, liberals always pretend that they're against war, but they started some wars against our culture about 50 years ago. And in fact, 3 wars that I want to talk to you about this evening, they started against the American culture. And if not for groups like this one, that if you did not exist, then we would be hard-pressed to believe that our country could survive and become that and stay the haven for liberty and justice for all. Because American Family today is under such attack. The numbers from just recently, in August 2014 jobs report revealed some startling facts. The first fact that it revealed is there is a rapid rise in single American adults. In 1976, the first year in which data was available, singles made up 37.4% of the American population, American adults. Today, that number is 49.7%. But yet at the same time, the second thing it revealed is that the nuclear family is in steep decline. In 1970, 40% of all households were headed by married couples with children. Today, that number is 18%. And the third thing that revealed is that the single family is in steep incline upwards. In 1970, only 7% of the children lived with a mother who had never married. Last year, that number was 48%. 48% of American children live with a mother who never married. These numbers are closely related, and their meaning for American society, culture, and politics is both profound and troubling. You know, what happened 50 years ago in order to gain the power that they want to get and keep, and hopefully we can stop, especially this November. They've gained the power to transform America into a secular utopia. Liberals began to build a political base by convincing blacks and other low-wage voters that redistribution of wealth was in the interest of social justice. Now I'm going to define for you social justice because a lot of people think it's a pretty cool idea, that it's a pretty cool saying, especially your youth. They're coming home from these cesspools we call schools, and they're starting to talk to you about social justice and how these ideas might really help us equalize the playing field. But the definition of social justice is the great equalizer, to level the playing field between the haves and the have-nots, the rich and the poor, the privileged and the underclass. You hear them say it all the time. They're seeping it in. It's now they're out of the closet talking about how they want to make sure that they equalize the divide, or that great divide between the privileged and the underclass. Or some are even going as far as to say out loud now today, they want to take from the sons of the enslavers and give it to the sons of the enslaved. In their quest for social justice, though, blacks were the first group to get caught up in this social engineering of the left, and they became the first casualties of these three cultural wars that have been raging in our society against American culture and against American family, and that's why your work is so important. This has been going on for quite some time, and it's starting to spill off into every single community across our country as the numbers are showing up now in current data. For the last 50 years, blacks have been conditioned to put liberal policies and politicians above all their other concerns, above their faith, above their family, even above their freedom, in exchange for so-called social justice. And today they're paying a great price. Now remember, the civil rights movement was a moral movement. It was about removing governmental barriers so that man could live free according to the Constitution. The civil rights generation of the 50s wanted repentance and revival. The social justice generation of today wants revenge and redistribution. The first war that these progressives started against our culture, which have made your work really difficult, is a war on religion. It weakened our public institutions and opened a door for a culture of corruption. I mean, you can't even trust the NSA, the TSA, the RA. You can't trust any of the letters in Washington anymore. I mean, I don't care what they're calling themselves. They're just not trustworthy. And we think about even the war on religion and trying to remove all symbols. I feel that the politicians are behind it, because when you go to Washington, you start seeing the identities of our founding fathers, because Christian symbol is absolutely everywhere. In fact, if you go up into the Senate chamber, they have all the philosophers of the world with their little heads turned sideways, except Moses. He's looking right at those liars. And I think that they're trying to get Moses on up out of there. They want Moses out of there, and that's why they have waged this war and allowed this war to go on for an indefinite period of time, it seems like. But frankly, one of the things that we should be hopeful about, that we can turn things around, is that it hasn't been going on that long. We're talking just a couple of generations. It was in the 60s that they began a lot of this social engineering. So we build out into these new generations and our youth, we can recover ourselves as a nation. They scrubbed our schools of all reference to God. In 1962, the Supreme Court struck down state-sponsored school prayer. In 1963, the court ruled that you can't read the Bible or recite the Lord's Prayer in public school. By the time it got to 1980s, they said no 10 commandments. The second war that the progressives declared on our culture 50 years ago was a war on marriage, which weakened women and opened this door to this new culture of meaninglessness. You know, they want to talk about a war on women. Are you serious? The feminist movement is nothing more than a promotion of monism, which is the elimination of gender binary. Conjugal marriage is the capstone for all humanity. It's from our Creator himself, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And yet they want to start washing our society of what the pillar of the society, the family. And now look what's happened as a result. Homosexuality is now dividing us and bringing deep hostility into the public square. And I've always looked at it this way. All sexual behavior is adult behavior. Keep it private. And now look what's happened. Abortion has deeply hurt us. 56 million dead in 40 years, that should give us all great pause. And one of the things that we're working on, and I'm glad to hear that you're working on just getting parental notification and every incremental step we can get so that we can get to the point that we overturn Roe v. Wade. It may be legal, but it's not lawful in God's eyes, and we are going to end abortion in our lifetime in this country. And after 40 years of wandering in that wilderness, God then gave us Gosnell. And now we saw into abortion clinic. And we're taking every effort to rid our nation of this horrible, horrible crime against humanity. But it didn't stop there when you start thinking about the impact of these liberal wars, this utopia that they thought that they could build out, and its impact on the family. In 1960, 75% of American adults were married, compared to only 50% today. In 1960, 45% of young adults between 18 and 24 were married, compared to only 9% today. But I tell you, it would be one thing if then they were sexually celibate. But no, they're sexually active, but without marriage. So in 1980, when Ronald Reagan was president, 18% of births were out of marriage, as I've already mentioned, compared to 43% today. 1.7 million in 2011 alone. Blacks believe in this lie first, their family collapsed first. They went from 22% out of wedlock birth rates in the 60s to 72% today. Whites, they thought that they were insulated from these secular ideas, humanism and moral relativism. No, they moved from 3% in the 60s to 30% today. Hispanics, Latinos, whatever political term we want to put on them, there was no data in the 60s because they were not a political special interest group to be manipulated at that point. But they are today, so we keep data today, and their out-of-wedlock birth rates are 53%. And so while most in this room would agree that traditional families are the bearers of both culture and values, in a Gallup poll done earlier this year, 71% of respondents between 18 and 34 said having a baby out of marriage is morally acceptable. Not that I don't know, not that, hey, whatever, not that I don't care, not that, well, what, you do your thing, I'll do mine. No, they said it's morally acceptable. The challenge for those libertarians that think common morality, or what some of the social thinkers call shared space virtue, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter? Well, according to Ron Haskins of the Brookings Institution, in 2009, the poverty rate for children in homes with married parents was 11%. The poverty rate for children in single-headed households, 44.3%. These are the lies. These are the damage of the lies of the left. You want to know what you're warring for as a family institute? You're pushing back darkness. Because the third war that they started simultaneous to these other wars, the progressives declared a war on poverty, and it weakened family and opened a door to this horrible culture of entitlements. And the Great Societies had great costs. In just 50 years, blacks went from 70% of their children being raised in married families to now 70% are being raised in single families. And as history has shown us, without families as a crucible for societies collapse and communities collapse. And the next thing you know, as the scripture said, where there's no vision, crime runs rampant. And we're beginning to spill out from our inner cities, but we certainly can see a glimpse in every single thing that these liberals have touched. We see the damage of their philosophies. All across every blue area, we're seeing the damage of their philosophies. The 50-year legacy of the culture wars and liberal lies in black community. Today, 25% of blacks wallow in poverty off the hand of the state, and another 23% work for the state. They're bureaucrats. People ask all the time, well, how come they won't vote for us? Because people vote their economic interests. And when your economic interests are government, you vote for more of it. The most prosperous black community in the country is right outside of Washington, D.C. Progressivism gripped America's poor and minority communities some 50 years ago and locked 3 generations in economic stagnation. And today, these culture wars are collapsing all of our families and choking our entire society. The means-tested federal welfare programs alone cost $800 billion annually. You know, I was reading this column that Peter Thiel did. He was making he's like one of the co-founders of PayPal, and they were having these deep discussions in Wall Street Journal about whether, what was he talking about, monopolies versus competition, and whether competition is a good idea. Are we really warring for monopoly, or are we really warring for competition? What's the better environment to grow your business in? And he's arguing that monopolies are better. If you can get out there in front of everybody and own it all without being called names, then you want to do that. But one of the things that he revealed in the column was that how much the tech industry, the consumer tech industry of all of our cell phones, all of our iPhones, all of these types of things, all of our pads, what that value is. And it was like $960 billion. And that surprised me because I thought that it would be a lot higher than that. And then I was talking to somebody about it. They said, well, actually, I thought that was pretty high. And I guess it's really relative. But when you're thinking about that we're spending that much just on a welfare state, we got a lot of work to do. I mean, we're talking about the entire economy of the consumer tech world is equal to what we're spending for people to live lawlessly and let their lives fall just into a little dark hole. Incredible. In the first 3 years of the Obama administration, the spending on these means-tested programs increased almost $150 billion, or 31%. Today, 53% of all births are paid for by Medicaid. Medicaid foots the bill for 60% of all of our long-term nursing home care. You think that this doesn't matter? You think that the Family Institute's not doing great work? You think that if they get hit enough in the paper or the liberals lie on them enough or the politicians distance themselves enough that we shouldn't care about these things? No, Obamacare is going to add another 20 million individuals onto the 60 million already covered by Medicaid. And Medicaid is not included in that number that I just gave you about what we spend on means-tested welfare programs. The fact is the federal government now takes 25% of the American economy to pay for all of this damage that we've allowed to occur, because until 25 years ago, There was not an aggressive movement to say, no, we're going to keep pushing back. We're going to keep making sure that we secure family, because family and economic policy and or these moral issues, they like to call them, or social issues they want to call them, and there's economic, it's the same coin. One will not work without the other. If you do not have strong family, you are not going to be able to have strong community. And today, in the 80s, 20% of Americans got more from government than they put in. Today, 60% of Americans get more from government than they put in. Oh, you're going to give me some water? Thank you. I do, thank you. How did you know? I'm trying not to talk fast, but they told me I only had 30 minutes, and I have a lot to say. I guess I could have just gave you 30 minutes of it. But come on, guys, how are we going to do this? How are we going to build a nation of free and prosperous people if we're a nation of irresponsible and government-dependent people? Out of control debt, enslavement to government, and broken families is just not a formula for a great society. But the good news is we can change. The good news is that we're celebrating 25 years here tonight. The good news is that every part of our society that's untouched by government is going great. I mean, look at this iPad. My 2-year-old granddaughter teaches me new things every single day on my little iPad. Where American innovation is free and productivity is free, it's prospering. It's going great. But there's some things that we have to look at. We have real challenges, and there's serious work to get done. I mean, for me, as you heard in my introduction, getting the message of freedom and personal responsibility into our hardest-hit minority communities is my #1 priority, my #1 work. It's insulting that liberals keep pretending they care about the poor, yet they stand in the way of school choice vouchers and personal retirement accounts, both measures that will put somebody on the path for independence and prosperity. You know, these liberal progressives, I'm doing everything I can, especially as I see the callers in the room, to keep my peace in the Lord. And as the pastor said earlier, but it's very difficult to deal with them, because they say they're speaking on behalf of the help, yet they're the most cruel offenders of their servants. In fact, I read one quote that said, the poor to them are not simply takers, as Republicans might suggest, but worse. The poor are acceptors, beggars, dependent peasants, and bleeding minorities that should be loyal to Democrats for every left-wing pro-abortion and pro-dependency molded crumb forced to them in the name of social justice. The poor more than anyone need this work. They need to understand what is broken down in our society. They need help to get their children out of broken schools. They need help to get off from under broken healthcare policy and broken housing policy and broken retirement policy and broken welfare policy. And the reason they're under all of these policies is because their families have collapsed. So we have to protect these interests. We have to make sure they understand, even for our seniors, to be fighting now to even keep them alive. And those that some might call disabled. No, God is the one that gave humanity, and every gift is precious in his sight, and every person is unique. So I'm working relentlessly all across this country and with courageous leaders in Washington, D.C. to get this work done, and the work of this Family Institute, because they speak into your local community about the values and virtues that made this country great and will keep this country great. Eternal truths and boundaries that should not be crossed. Boundaries. People want to talk about boundaries anymore, but these boundaries were set in our Constitution by our founders. They told us we hold these truths to be self-evident. And now we're going to let people redefine an institution that's been around for thousands of years? We're going to let them rename marriage? No, so our country will be free. We have these boundaries, boundaries that they themselves were forced to debate for some 80 years because slavery was a violation of these very principles. Freedom and the ideals of personal responsibility conflicted with the very law, the very land that they themselves established. But we're no longer a free country when politicians get to define truth. You know, I remember reading, I forgot who, I remember who it was, but he's a really controversial author, so I don't mention his name when I quote out of his book. He's since passed on, and one day that people will really appreciate him. But he talked about how under the impact of moral relativism, justice becomes a creature of the state. It's defined then by politicians. It's what Stalin or Hitler or the Supreme Court or Barack Obama says it is. It's nothing more than that. It's the will of the mob. It's the belief of the pack. And the only thing left for man, because there's no relationship to God, is conformity. And that's exactly where we are today. I mean, they even have us all living in pink houses out in California with blue and yellow and green trash cans or whatever colors they want. I had to send mine back. I'm like, I am not putting all these trash cans out in front of my house. I'm rarely here. Well, no, you need to recycle. No, you recycle for me. And I'm not going to store your blue trash can in my garage for you. I think it takes more energy for you to come up with that truck to get it with one maybe milk carton in it every week than for me to just dump all the stuff in the same can. Conformity. No relationship to God. So that's it for all of us. Do what we're told. We're not free when a politician gets to define truth. It's nowhere in the Declaration or the Constitution that a politician has a right to force free people to pay for the lifestyles and choices of other free people. Not their housing, not their health care, not their food, not their child care, not their retirement, not their habits, and certainly not their sex life. Now, I am surprised that we've allowed this movement to define the terms of the discussion in civil rights when we're really talking about entitlements. We're talking about somebody paying for your life. And that is not what the founders had in mind. Not their Viagra, not their condoms, not their birth control devices, and certainly not their abortions. This work that you're hearing about this evening is important. It's critical for our very existence of our nation. Urgent for our children, our grandchildren. And when I think about my life, and I told you, after that Christian conversion, I changed. I just got it together. Time won't allow me to give my full testimony this evening about how journeying through to get to the place that I am today. But I believe I went into their so-called safe legal rare abortion clinics. It wasn't until the fourth time that I had a gut instinct way down deep inside that there must be something wrong with killing your offspring. And that's how I ended up having another child, still not married, and ended up on the welfare state. But God blessed me so that my daughter, I married her off. In fact, this little girl's her fan. My daughter's an actress. And every 9 to 12-year-olds, if I meet a 9 to 12-year-old, I'm like, do you watch Lab Rats? Yeah, oh, that's my daughter, the mom. But she had me 2 grandchildren. I got Mr. James, 8 years old. Wow, he's a blessing, I tell you. I love that little kid. I remember when he was 4 years old, I taught him how to write on the walls at his parents' house and I taught him to tell his dad he didn't need a bedtime. And then he started talking back to me, telling me he didn't need a bedtime, so I threw him off in Catholic school. He just did his first communion last year. And then I have Miss Naomi. I mean, she's 2 years old, just cute as a button. Oh my God, she is so cute. When she was 1.5, I took her to Neiman's to buy some shoes, and she picked out 3 pairs. I said, she deserves a Neiman card. I'm gonna get her a credit card for her Christmas and give her the bill to her parents. That's what this work is about, to save this country for our children and our grandchildren. That's why this is important that we're here this evening, to save this country for the rest of the world. And that's why I'm thankful to be here tonight with you, so that I can just encourage you to do something, to do anything, so that we can have a future and a hope. Thank you.